we're going to continue on stage 1. Okay, hands up. Who's here to learn how to make great products? And who is here also to make a career? Yes, because you can do both. And how you can do that, you will learn in our next talk, From Code to Career, Thriving in Tech, with Jan Hegewald. Please welcome, with a warm round of applause, Jan Hegewald, VP Engineering at SumUp.
Good morning. From the fact that you are here at Digitale Leute Summit, I guess it's for me too late to warn you about a career in tech, right? Okay, so what I will do instead, I will try to explain a little bit my journey in tech and also the learnings that I drew from that, and maybe that's helpful for one or the other here in the audience. But first of all, who am I? So what is my journey? I'm Jan. I have a very traditional background, so I studied computer sciences, studying with that in 2002 at the Hegewald University in Berlin, since I'm from Berlin. Yeah, computer sciences. I also picked a minor subject, which was business economics. I would say today it was not particularly useful, but you had to pick a minor, so I did that. And yeah, at this time I already started to work in parallel as a working student at Capgemini. It's a consultancy company, and what I did there was custom software development, so working in different projects for different customers, different tech stacks in different industries, and I learned essentially the whole software development life cycle. Yeah, and then in 2007 I did my diploma thesis in collaboration with the Hasso-Plattner Institute, and then also got my degree. And I was very lucky because I had done a lot of stuff that I will also talk about later on. For example, led a project at Capgemini, which allowed me to then start into a full employment, and I started already as a senior software engineer because of the experiences I had made before. Later on, I also got promoted to managing consultant. Yeah. So then, after a few more years, in 2011, I was offered an opportunity to lead my first team at a smaller consultancy. Campana & Schott is its name. And yeah, I picked that, so I also was managing consultant there. And I did this for 2 years, and I still remember at that time I already had my first son and always brought him to the kita in the morning, and then I had to hurry to catch the next train or the plane to go to some customer somewhere. And then also a project was about to start at a big German car manufacturer in Wolfsburg, and my manager expected me to be there for like 3 days every week for the next 1.5 years. And that was despite we had agreed when I joined that I would not travel too much. So at that point I realized that consulting no longer is the right thing for me, and I started to look for something else. That was also about the time when Agile came up, maybe what Campana & Schott does. We also introduced technical solutions, but it was much more focused on project, program, portfolio management. And this was the time when Agile was coming up and becoming more popular. And after a lot of considerations, I finally found my way into e-commerce, and I joined Idealo in 2014. First, I was team lead Java 2. This is not referring to the Java version that we were using, but we named the teams after the technologies, and then we simply numbered them. This is why it's Java 2. Later on, I became a group engineering manager. That was the first time that I was then also responsible for being a lead of leads. Yeah, and what I also was able to do in Idealo, I was part of a what we call the product and technology board. We did a participative reorganization of the whole product development environment of around 250 people. And after that, I also had to find myself a new role because I reorganized myself away as well. And then I became head of technology for the B2B area and also interim for business operations. Then after 4 years, I found a job ad that looked like made for me, because when I was head of B2B, I was responsible for integrating hundreds of thousands of online stores into the price comparison platform. And then I found a job ad by Zalando that was also about leading a data platform, I would say. What was especially intriguing to me, because I have this engineering background, but I was always close also to product. I strongly believe that engineering for the sake of engineering is useless, right? You always need to have a customer problem that you're solving. And I was even considering in this reorganization of Idealo to potentially go in a product role, which then didn't happen because we found a better solution. But at Zalando, I was first time hired as a dedicated owner. That's a concept, they call it like that. It's the equivalent to Amazon's single-threaded leadership. So the idea is that you're responsible for engineering and product and the business outcomes of your unit. Later on, so I started as head of product of a platform. By the way, that was also the title I was most happy and proud of, because you can abbreviate that to head of pop. That was really nice. Later on, I also became responsible for more departments. So for the product detail page, so the one page that you look at when you buy something or look at something in Zalando. And I built a third department with a colleague from scratch during the pandemic and also during the lockdowns, which was very interesting. And then I also got promoted to director of engineering in that same context. And since 2022, I'm now at my current employer, which is SumUp. Who of you knows what SumUp does? A few, cool. So we mainly do card acceptance. You might have seen the small, slim card readers in restaurants or cabs, but we also do much more. So when I started, after some turbulent times that will also come back to, I was responsible for our point of sale team, building like point of sale solutions for people running a restaurant, for example. And yeah, I built this team up from scratch, I would say, and then I also had to do a merger with an acquired company in France. And after that, and since March of this year, I'm responsible for our growth tribe that is essentially like responsible for customer acquisition, customer registration and onboarding, and then activation. All right. That's my journey. I come back to the different points, and I learned a lot of things. And the first thing that I learned is nobody knows what they are doing. And I need to include myself first and foremost as well. I mentioned that when I was in Capgemini, still a working student, I had a lot of responsibilities. We had a customer, a new customer. It's a logistics partner, as you can see here. And we wanted and needed to deliver a greenfield project for them. That was, they opened up a new warehouse, and there was a certain date that was set at which time hundreds of trucks would arrive at that warehouse. And what we were about was to build a management software for them to unload the trucks. They would carry documents that are stored in this warehouse. And they needed to scan them, catalog them to know where they store it in the warehouse. So it means this was only a few months in the future. This date was really a fixed deadline, right? There was no way to extend that. And I was a project manager for that. Sounds nice challenge, but let me explain the full context. So as I said, I was still a working student, and I was writing my diploma thesis at the time. And also so only limited time that I could spend on working. And I have two team members. One was a friend of mine, is still my best friend. He was also a working student. He was not writing his diploma thesis, this was a benefit, but he was still also limited to 20 hours per week. And we had a second team member. She had just joined, but she also just did her degree. So it was let's say, we were not necessarily set up for full success. Nevertheless, we delivered in time, but I must say it was pretty wild. But what I can also say is we managed. I mean, it could have gone wrong, and I think we could have also mitigated that if there were signs of that. But we found our way into it, although we were not really experienced. And yeah, we learned our craft through that. I mentioned my first transition was from Capgemini to Campana and Schott, and this was also a key moment for me in my career because I was 9 years in that first company. It was my only company that I'd seen before, and I was super scared and insecure whether I should do that or not. Not even because I would, for the first time, have like disciplinary responsibility for people. That surprisingly not. But I didn't also know like, is that the right decision, right? Because if you're changing a company for the first time, although also at that time things were going southwards, so it was also about time, but I was still not sure. Is it a mistake? Should I stay? What if it's worse over there? But ultimately, one key moment that I had and that helped me to make this decision was, it's a great opportunity for me to lead my first team. And maybe the decision is wrong, probability is low, but it could be wrong. But even if it is, I can still do something else. And I think we're still very privileged in the industry that we are in, that we, in most cases, have these opportunities, right? There's different professions where it's much harder to change jobs. Like if you are at some big manufacturers in the southern area of Germany, for example, where you work there for your life, it's really much harder to do something else. And with that insight, I then took the decision to move and joined Campana and Schott. And as I said, it was the first time I had responsibility for people, but this was not what scared me in context to what I do there. But it was, they were focusing on project, program, portfolio management, methodology, consulting. And in Capgemini, I was also for some time in a staff department responsible for our project management methodology, but it was just one tailored to software development in a consulting context. And at Capgemini, at Campana and Schott, we did very different project management initiatives. So we did, for example, innovation projects at AIDA cruises, the ones with the cruise ships. We also supported the infamous Berlin airport construction to make it not take even longer. And also we helped, for example, Bombardier build trains. And so I had no idea about this, how this works. And I was always thinking, oh, when I go to the customers, they will soon realize I don't know the stuff and I cannot help them with their project management. What I found was interesting, just with the stuff that I knew, I could still already help them. They really, customers, and it's really multiple of them, knew much less than I did. And of course, I learned then quickly all that it takes. There's all the PMI stuff and so on. And yeah, this was also another takeaway from me that, and I can also summarize this here as the key learnings. In the end, don't let yourself be held back by diving into something new. This will also increase just going forward all the time. Trust in yourself and your ability to grow. And I think we need to, but we also can learn like anything. And always keep in mind, all the others also probably don't know much better than you do. That was my first insight. The second that I had is that career is not something that you should do alone. It's rather a multiplayer game. If I look at my second transition after Campana and Schott to Idealo, this was the time when I decided to move out of the consulting world, and I was not sure in the beginning where should I go. And luckily, I had someone who helped me in that decision making, and that is all about mentoring. I had someone. I got to know her already in Capgemini. She was doing sales trainings for the teams. And then I also brought her to my second employer, and she then did the same there. And she was kind of informally mentoring me all the time. And she helped me really reflect on what to do next. And so this was super helpful for me in that situation because I didn't know much. I just knew what I had been working in. It was consulting. That's it. I didn't know what was out there. And in that regard, she helped me. And I think it's something that I also do these days myself a lot still, did and do. Mentoring, like in informal ways. There's also formal programs. And I liked it a lot because it's often a win-win situation, because even if I mentor people today, I still learn a lot about what they are doing because they're typically in different fields, and it's super valuable for me. So I can just recommend doing that. But this helped me identify where I wanted to go, but not yet brought me into the job at Idealo. What brought me into this job was really my network. And I was super surprised about this because in the end, the CTO of Idealo hired me at that time. And I knew him from a consulting project before at a different employer. And he remembered myself. I was not assuming he would, but he did. And so in the end, he also decided to hire me, and I started there, which I'm super grateful for, because this brought me to product development, actually from project management to product management. And so my takeaway is also, if you look for a job anytime, tell everyone you meet, right? You will never know whose mother's neighbor's aunt might be looking for the dream role that you are after, and that can really help you with that, so please do. All right. Besides finding a job, I think this team or multiplayer thing is also super relevant when you're doing the job. One thing that I experienced when I get into this leadership role is that it's leadership is vastly different from how we normally work, right? Normally we have these agile teams, we do everything in teams, we talk about team topologies and so on, and it's natural that we deliver stuff in teams. Once you move in a leadership position, out of a sudden people, I feel always like, leave you like, you're a lead now, you know what to do, good luck with that. And that's of course not helpful, right? Because also as the lead, you need sparring partners, you are unsure, you need to discuss critical cases that you have, whatever. And of course there's trainings, but trainings also always go as far as they can, right? So what I like to recommend always is find yourself a support peer group. And typically you have peers, right? It's not like by design that you talk to them a lot, especially in companies that are really siloed, but you have people on your level, and they can be useful just, for example, for sharing the pain that you feel, for complaining, because you can't do this in front of your employees, right? But you need to have someone to reflect on that as well. And this is what is really is a good thing. And also for support. And also what I did, once I became responsible for leading leads, I created these peer groups. For example, at Idealo, it was the first time I created things like leadership circles, where the leads in my orgs, where we met and discussed like critical things that people are facing, discussed how we want to lead. It can be about performance management, can be about how to handle like cases where there's performance issues and we need to do performance improvement plan and so on. All very challenging things that normally are also not nice and not easy to do. But if you can discuss this with others, that's really cool. And also similar, when I started at Idealo, there was a setup where there was a CTO and a CPO. They were sitting in one office, but not really talking to each other. And also the rest of the organization below, both of them replicated that behavior. That was, of course, super unproductive. And luckily, we changed that soonish. And then Idealo changed to a model that I still appreciate a lot. This is of like dual or triple leadership. So in my case, it was like if you are a head of technology or engineering, you always have a counterpart as a head of product. And it's really a counterpart in the sense of that we were held accountable together. So anybody could approach any of us, like they could come to me and I could not say, yeah, we're not that far because product requirements are unclear. And they could come to my counterpart and they could not say, yeah, we're behind because engineering is too slow. And that was really good, because of the joint mindset. And I also appreciated this dual leadership role because it really allowed me to have a sparring partner, a counterpart to bounce off ideas with. We were even like stepping in for each other. If someone could not make it to a meeting, the other did. And it really, for me, improved the quality of my work life because it's not that you're doing the stuff alone. Yeah. So key learnings here, I think mentoring, both as a mentor as well as a mentee, is a very cool thing and brings value, always, I think. The other recommendation, of course, build out your network and use it, especially when you need it. And the last thing is also find and create peer groups for yourself and for people that you're working with, because it makes work much more fun. All right, now let's talk about the jobs themselves. So not all jobs are created equal. I remember very well, or I know very well still, I experienced that today. Friends of mine who also studied at the same time as me did not go into like more modern, progressive world of what you can do as a computer scientist, but they work, for example, for companies they had already worked there, like let's say nearly public utility companies that work in a mode that is very traditional. And what always resonates with me very strongly is they cannot even imagine how we do modern product development, modern work, and so on, and all the stuff that we discuss at conferences like this, because they're still in this very old-fashioned mode. This gets better slowly, but it's still way behind. And I had a benefit due to my when I was a consultant, that I could see a lot of companies from the inside. And one thing that I learned there the most was also the places where I didn't want to go. That I was very sure. I didn't know where to go, but I knew where not to go, like these companies where it's 110% about politics and 0% about impact. And I've seen shockingly many of these, I must say. so this was good because I knew that that's not something. So what companies should you look for? I think what is good in tech are tech companies. It's kind of obvious, of course, but here what is different, the tech department is not a cost center, but it's part of the business, ideally a business driver, ideally it's a product-driven company, so you're really at the core of shaping things that make an impact for customers. That's really good, but it also depends a little bit on what you want to learn. So I would always recommend, like the big tech companies are good if you want to see very professional development methodologies. And I mean, when I say development methodologies, I mean everything, product development, delivery through engineering and go-to-market. And if you want to learn a lot about business in a fast time, I would always recommend to go to more the startups. But at the same time, and this is one of the first contradictions I do to myself in this presentation, there will be more, don't be fooled to work just for the dream company. I would still argue that what makes a big difference is also your manager. It's also one of the next points. And I would say a great boss at an average company can be much more helpful than a bad boss at a great company. You always can trade this off with how does it look in your CV, but that would be my recommendation. And yeah, if you think about not just the company, but also the roles, there are so many. I mean, I myself changed from individual contributor to lead of leads. Luckily, in our industry, this is not always needed, right? In many other industries, that's the case. The only way to make a career, for us, we typically, in mature organizations, have like an expert development path or career path, so that's really good. But we also have like a plethora of roles that you can take on. I did some research and listed like what you can become in the tech industry in all the fields that we have. Yeah, it's much more than 100 roles. But also be careful about the titles, right? Because these roles are very different. I was a managing consultant in Capgemini. I did not formally, in terms of disciplinarily, manage any people. At the same time, I became also managing consultant in Campana and Schott, and there I was leading a team de facto. When I was director in Zalando, I led more people, around 60, than I did when I started as a VP in SumUp. In the beginning, it was just 15. So don't pay too much attention to that. And likewise, when I left Zalando, I was director. At that time, I had less impact to change things and ability to change things than I did when I joined, where I was just the head of, which is also very interesting. So don't over-index on the roles. That's my point here. Rather look at what's your impact and what's the scope and what's also the thing that you can do. Another lesson that I learned also the very hard way is don't take on too much. I did this at least in the beginning when I was at Campana and Schott, because when I was leading this team, this role encompassed everything. I was responsible for the service offering of the team because you have to sell it to customers. I have to acquire these customers in the business. So I was responsible also that the work of my whole team is sold, they can make billable work. And on top of this, I also had to do billable work myself. So I had to be working for customers, charging money while doing all the rest. And I remember a situation where I was at a client, I had to develop a concept, and then a prospect customer called me, and I was in a pre-sales phase and always needed to spend time with them and so on. But so this made it rather impossible for me to really do productive work. Yeah, a second mistake that I also made when I was at Idealo, I mentioned I was also responsible for 2 product areas in the end. The second was just interim, and I took this on, and interim meant it was a year, and also until I left. So it was not really interim. And I tried to convince myself that they had no one else at that point. I tried to convince myself that it was better that I was there and supporting than if there was no one, and I think that's fair. But on the other hand, I think also I did not fully understand the domain. I could not help them a lot with the product direction and strategy. Of course, I helped the people, I could shield them from some stuff and so on. But I did not do the job that I would have liked to do. I rather did it poorly for a year. So be aware of that. And one thing is also super important. Career in tech, I think, does not need to be and cannot be linear, right? I was in consulting, then I was in in-house development, I was in e-commerce, and I was in finance. I was in engineering, I was nearly or semi in product, everything can happen. And you might not get that promotion. You might go through layoffs. You might live through economic depression. You might have kids. You might get sick. You might be replaced by AI. You might want to make a change, or you might want to make multiple changes. And that's okay. I think that's also the beauty of our industry, that a lot of that is possible. Going forward, maybe even required. But don't be too obsessed with a predefined path. Summarizing that, be clear what you want to learn, right? Big tech is for professionalism, startups for business. There's tons of opportunities, and they are also evolving. I think this is also super important to take into account. Don't take on too much for yourself, and also be prepared for all the various changes that are upcoming. One thing that I mentioned also briefly is there is the boss effect. I think you should not underestimate the importance of a boss. There is this proverb of people join a company, but they leave managers. I think if you think this through, you should also rather join managers, and that's what I also typically do if I look, or if I'm in discussions about a new job. It's super important for me to know who they are, how they work, how they think. They define also things like work-life balance. For me, it makes a huge difference to have a boss who has kids as well or not. I think it's really a huge difference. And ideally, they help you also just beyond the company. I had one great lead in Zalando who it was kind of shocking to me. He was so focused on my development, my personal, professional growth, more than I was. It was really shocking, but it was really cool, and he really supported me a lot. And one thing is also important to never forget, you are always in a sandwich position. Like there's always someone superior to you. Even if you are the CEO, you have like, I don't know, a board. If you are in the board, you have the shareholders, whatever. So you always need to also be able to manage your manager or your boss and to live with them very well. And I think this also is a thing to make thoughtful decisions. In Zalando, I was once offered a job that I put down because I knew I would be having a hard time with the manager I would have had there. And also, when I did my recent change in SumUp, I also knew there was a potential manager I wouldn't wanted to have as my manager, and I made clear I would just change internally if this is not the case, and it worked. So also be confident about that, because it also determines if you're set up for success and if you're having fun at work. And here comes the second self-contradiction. Bosses are important, but also you cannot count too much on them, and you need to own your career yourself. Why? I was 4 years in Zalando, and in that time I had 5 managers. And I'm now 3 years in SumUp, and I also had 3 managers. So that's a very important part. You still need to own your career and also have the independence. Let's take the example when I transitioned from Zalando to SumUp. That was super chaotic. It was really nice. I was acquired by my manager there. He called me on LinkedIn. In the beginning, we just chatted. We discussed about leadership topics. It was really good. I was not looking for a job. Over time, and he wanted to attract me to SumUp. Over time, I thought about it, and also things changed a bit at Zalando, so that I thought, yeah, might be good. And then I joined there. But when I joined, it was total chaos. First, I was hired into a so-called tribe of tribes, but this was like far too big, and this organizational part was being broken into parts within my arrival at SumUp. And that meant also I was not sure what I would do. And also people did not really talk to me. I really lacked transparency. And I must also honestly say, sometimes at the edge of what am I doing here? Should I look for something else? And then out of a sudden, it appeared that there was a role for me. There was a new department, the one that I mentioned I would then build up. I got a manager also that I didn't foresee, didn't play any role before in any discussions, hadn't seen him, but he became a manager, but I was very lucky with that. But what I want to say, you also need to be very resilient. We heard this also in the keynote about the team topologies. Organizations change so much. You cannot freak out every time. You also need to be sometimes observing. Although I acknowledge there's always also some risk, of course. So my key learning here is when you decide for a job, check your manager, and also you are nevertheless the CEO of your career. And the last thing that I want to talk about is keep up or get outpaced. I think one maybe most of what I said until now becomes somewhat irrelevant in the nearer future, or might be outdated at least, because of AI. Of course, I know every presentation needs to have this, but I really believe that this is an important part here. We know it will change tech, we know it will change business, and I'm pretty sure also our society. We don't know yet how. It will maybe, I'm also not sure about this even, not take our jobs, but people who can leverage AI for sure will. So I have no idea, to be honest, right? I cannot predict what will happen, but what I'm really sure about is we need to adapt and things will change drastically. So I think the single most important thing is that we step up our learning game. And I think for example, with AI, I don't think it makes sense to learn foreign languages anymore. It will soon become super irrelevant because everything will be translated in real time with invisible devices and so on. But we need to be able to pick up new skills. And I want to give you an outlook, and I also want to emphasize this is a magnifying glass. This is not a looking glass. So I think we tend to underestimate the impact of what's coming, and we tend to overestimate how long it will take. What I want to explain very briefly, I was at a conference last week, and the product manager from Google, Sai, shared something that I found very interesting. And I have a contrary view to what Stefan said in the opening keynote today, because he said, yeah, let's see, maybe engineering jobs will be replaced first, product management jobs maybe last, and let's see when that happens. What the presentation was about was a multi-agent system, and it does the whole product development process. It starts with a design thinking agent, then goes to a product manager agent. It creates everything. You just put in a topic that you're interested in. It does the discovery with persona creation, user empathy mapping, user journey mapping, PRD written. It does design and delivery of a prototype. It's for a prototype, to be fair, through another system of full stack engineering agent, front-end coding agent, plus an architect agent supervising what these agents do. And it even creates a go-to-market plan with all the product marketing, channel selection, and so on. And the important thing is this is not a big initiative that Google is driving. That Google product manager did all of this in his spare time with available agents that are out there based on Gemini. So if you think about what happens when someone puts real capacity and resources behind that, I think it will be impressive. And he's working currently with a university to make this open source, but in the end it creates even prototypes of applications that you can use to click through the visualized flow. And so it's super hard for me to predict what will be the future. I hate to end on such a low note, let me end maybe with something for the meantime until all of this happens, and this is some resources recommendations, what we can do in the meantime to make sure that we have a good role in the industry. On the left-hand side, I'm always asked about books, and the one that I recommend always the most is How to Have a Good Day from Carolyn Webb. Even in case we don't have to work. And maybe this is also not a bad news, because I could also imagine it's a great opportunity if we don't have to work for a living, but could just because we like. But until this happens, and even after this happens, it's super usable because this book gives you insights based on neuroscientific evidence and findings, but combined with very practical tips on like how to say no properly, how to manage your life, how to do time management, and so on. But it's really practical and also helps in your personal life. So even if we don't have to work, it's useful. Second one is on Instagram. Advice with Aaron is a super great account helping you with how to answer challenging interview questions in interviews, how to deal with toxic coworkers, and so on. Really nice. And of course, there's also some self-advertisement if you're interested in more topics around tech, organizations, leadership, and so on. There's a newsletter that I'm creating, the Tech Impact Uplift, and I'm also happy for LinkedIn connections. And with that, I would say thanks a lot for your time. I wish you all the best for your careers also, and I'm also open for questions, of course.
Thank you very much, Jan Hegewald. And I have the first question, actually. You said you cannot predict the future. Maybe we shouldn't predict the future, but build it. What would a great future look like? What do you wish for?
As I briefly sketched, I honestly believe, I'm not a Star Trek fan, but what I really like is their utopia of people work because they want to work. And I think we're getting to a point in the history of civilization where we could get there, right? Where work is no longer needed. And this could be super nice and cool. I'm not convinced we as a society will manage to do that. That's my biggest fear, honestly, but I think this would be very worthwhile if we would not be forced to work for a living, but just because we want to and we want to create impact, that would be cool. I would be happy about that.
Sounds good to me, and I mean, that you don't like Star Trek, I forgive you, but nobody's perfect. Okay, your questions, please. Okay, I see the question here first. What's your name, your role, and your question, please?
I'm Tine, and I'm currently at the Digitale Leute School. My question is, like, you mentioned don't take on too much, but that's very easy said.
Yes.
I've seen throughout my career. So what advice do you give? Because if you're new in a company, you don't want to say no to stuff, but if you're a long time there, people take advantage, but you also don't want to say no. So
Yeah.
what's the advice?
Yeah. So first, I know that is not easy, and it's easier said than done. I think what always helps is the mindset, because what I learned in these two occasions that I mentioned, it could have easily also ruined my impact fully, right? So it will backfire if it's really too much, right? Because then you will not be able to live up to what you want to deliver, the quality of it, and so on. So you need to be mindful, otherwise you're hurting yourself. Actually, in the book, there's also very good explanations of how to say no to things, which is typically about explaining what you're working on, which is more impactful, and so on and so forth. That helps a lot, because then people really realize that you're not turning them down because you do not want to or so, but it really creates the empathy in your counterpart that what you are busy with is more important, and you need to support it, and that you therefore don't have the capacity to serve them. Or there's like also other tricks, like you tell them, hey, yeah, I cannot do that now, I could come back to you about this in 2 months or something, and then I say, yeah, okay, then maybe not, and I will find someone else. But therefore also this book is really cool. And as I said, also what often happens is that it's presented to you as like a growth opportunity, that you get additional responsibility, in the worst case without promotion. I think there you also need to always be self-confident about, think about it, talk about the implications, and also like what is there a perspective, is there like a soonish promotion that you also aspire to or not, and then feel also empowered to challenge that, and maybe in the worst case say no. But this is what happens a lot, right? A lot of stuff, somebody leaves, you can do this as well, right? It's close to what you do. Please do and go ahead, and out of a sudden your scope is twice as big as before, but everything else is unchanged.
Thank you very much. And another question. I saw that one here. What's your name, your role, and your question, please?
Yeah, I'm Vince, product manager at Lina X. I'm curious, you spoke a lot about the influence of a boss on your career. Mm-hmm. My question is, what are the hallmarks for you if you hire new leaders? Mm-hmm. And also, if you're looking yourself for a new boss, then do they differ?
Okay, we're both very complex topics. I can do it only very briefly. When I hire for new leaders, a lot is, it's so cheesy, but it's about mindset. Do you have a compatible view? Because as I mentioned, you want to create these leadership groups also to have a like consistent leadership in your organization. So they need to have similar approaches, people positive aspects. In the end, I think there's all this tech thing and AI coming up, but in the end, until now at least, everything that is difficult in our industry is people, right? And I don't mean this as sarcastic as it sounds, but it's always a challenge, right? How do people collaborate and so on? So this is like what I typically look for. It's experience, also ideally in a similar environment, ability to navigate organization of the similar complexity, and then like a compatible, positive, people-positive leadership mindset when looking for leads, in very brief. When looking for a manager, I think this is easy, but because you will know, I think, subjectively very quickly whether you tick or not, and how they work and how not, and that you can figure out. What I typically also do is requiring multiple sessions with them, not just one interview where they ask you all the time. This does not help. But latest at the stage when they say, hey, we would now make you an offer, then I would say, hey, but let's talk a little bit also about my experiences and expectations, and so on. And also what I do in every interview when I hire people is I ask them about their expectations towards their manager, which is also helpful. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. And we will have time for very quick question. Please your name, your role, and your question.
Hi, my name is Margaret, and I'm an IT consultant at Altitude. And my question is more about your opinion, how you would handle this if you had a mentee with the foreign case, whereby the risk of being making the decision between being a specialist versus a generalist. So if you're used to being overseeing certain products for a very long time, so let's say you've been in search for 5 years and you switch within companies but still remain in search, how would you advise that? Do you become branded, like you're the search person and you cannot transition to a different product? Just your subject.
That's a very good question. This is a delicate line to find, right? The question is, first of all, what does the person need or want and enjoy? That's what I always start with, because if they're happy with that, and the job is not immediately at risk of being replaced by AI or whatever, then I would say, hey, that's also fine. And then you can also broaden your expertise, and you can also build very deep knowledge, right? That's also, like Stefan said earlier on, I think in an AI world, there's also either you need to be very broad and everything becomes also easier because a lot of things are assisted, or you go very deep because you can create and fine-tune these models yourself. I must, however, say that I think this group that is needed there will be small compared to the other group. But I would really start with what are they happy with, what are they enjoying, and can they imagine continuing this for, like, I don't know, 5, 6 years, and then it's fine. On the other hand, I think we will also see much more flexibility and lateral shifts in the job market going forward because of all the seismic changes that will happen. So I think it will not necessarily be the case that you're then really fixed to that one special field of expertise.
Thank you very much for the question. And that's it with Jan Hegewald, VP Engineering at SumUp, about how to thrive in tech. Thank you.